This year, we're looking at transformation of our places, and we're looking at social, cultural, and spiritual transformation. And we're delighted to have Steve Sutton from Teesside, church leader there, to share with us a little bit more about that. So, without further ado, let's invite Steve to say hello and just give us a 30-second intro to who you are and what you do, Steve.
Yeah, hey, yeah, lovely to be here with you. So yeah, I am a Baptist minister up in the northeast of England, in the bottom of Middlesbrough, and that's in the wider area of Teesside. Teesside's sort of like about 4 towns smushed together, and Middlesbrough is sort of the central town there. And yeah, lead a Baptist church, wonderful Baptist church, best Baptist church in the world. I always say it's a Baptist church with no Baptists in, so it makes it a brilliant Baptist church. And we've been here now. I think we're in our 14th year, just entering our 14th year at the moment here. And I'm married to Leah, and with 4 children.
Fantastic, brilliant. So, I mean, you're doing some amazing things in Teesside, which you're going to tell us about. But kick us off, if you would, with spiritual transformation. How do we need to understand this term?
Yeah. Well, spiritual transformation. I guess my heart is that it's just really, really important for us to remember this one, because particularly I've been operating around these gather movement circles for a number of years now, and been a part of the kind of journey that we've been going on as unity movements across the country. And sometimes we could have a tendency to forget that we are passionate about spiritual transformation as much as we are about the social and the cultural transformation stuff. And some of the exciting stories, I guess, that we hear from unity movements all across the country are about where we see churches working together, and there are large impacts socially that are happening, and they're inspiring, and we kind of get to hear about those, and that's amazing. But I'm passionate today to kind of get across that we are also a movement that needs to emphasize and remember and keep central spiritual transformation, because we are here as Jesus's people placed in our cities. We've got to remember that us as churches, as the church of our town or city, actually we've got a very particular and specific calling that is distinct from charities and from the local public sector and government authorities. Now, it's great that we work with all those guys, and it's great that we have loads of overlap, but there is also something very specific and particular about our calling as churches. We're Jesus's people, and we're sent into these locations. And if Jesus has sent us here, and he's got stuff for us to do, he's got mission for us to do, and some of that is social action, some of that is the physical and social transformation of our places, and those sort of realities of heaven on earth stuff, but a whole load of that as well is spiritual realities as well. The kingdom mission that God's got for our places is social and spiritual. The two are not separate and never ever should be separate, should they? And I guess maybe it's as I get a little bit older. I'm getting closer to 40 now, and as I get older, or maybe it's the pandemic, or maybe it's actually watching my mum die at the age of 59. But it's made me more and more passionate in recent years to just see people come to know Jesus, and to see people have their lives spiritually transformed by him. Because I mean, we work through our church, we work with a whole load of really broken people, and we're serving them with food banks, and we're trying to find them housing, and we're trying to sort out a whole load of practical issues in their lives. But ultimately, we see long-lasting transformation when they enter into a relationship with Jesus, and we see the power of walking with Jesus in their lives. And then also just the very fact that death is a reality, and there is we don't all live forever, and we have a message of hope that even in the face of death, is people are crying out for. And so I guess for many, many years, I would have described myself as one of those people that emphasized heaven on earth, let's seek Jesus' kingdom here as much as we can now. And in recent years, I think I've felt Jesus kind of balancing me a little bit. And now he's made me more and more passionate about just seeing people come to know him and love him and walk with him and see the transformation he brings in this life, but also the hope for the next life as well. Plus, also, Mark, we're in a spiritual battle. Spiritual transformation is massively important because we're in a spiritual battle. Our towns and cities are in a spiritual battle all the time. There is an enemy, and he's working out his plans and purposes over our towns and cities as well. And I'm passionate about the church stepping into, I guess, its authority and its responsibility spiritually. If we're the sent ones of Jesus Christ, then there's a spiritual authority that we operate in when we're in the places what we've been sent to. I think I've discovered a little bit of that just practically through prayer and worship, is that there is a specific spiritual authority that we carry when we're in the place and praying for the place that we've been sent into by Jesus, that isn't the same when we're somewhere else and playing for other places. I just think there's something that we carry when we're saying, hey, no, Jesus sent me here. There's a purpose he sent me. And in my prayer and in my worship and in my serving of this place, there's a spiritual authority. And I think as a church, we could do with re-emphasizing that. And as unity movements, let's emphasize that as well as the social impact that we can have. Let's emphasize our spiritual responsibility and our heart for spiritual transformation, for people to hear the gospel, respond to the gospel, and to come to know Jesus.
That's great, Steve. And so, I mean, just kind of reflecting back, sometimes I think about life in three spaces. There's, in fact, it's a sociological term, isn't it? Your first space, your second space, and your third space. First space, I think, is your family life. Second space is your working life. And third space is your sort of leisure time and your personal space. And actually, spiritual transformation is to transform all of those areas of our life, isn't it? You mentioned, your mum's story about dying, and we were blessed to hear her testimony, up until the time when she passed away, and how actually she lived well even in those last days, and in a sense that's about dying well, isn't it? In terms of our families and our children, in our workplaces, we want to work well, and we want to see relationships work well, and so spiritual transformation is across all these three areas, isn't it? And it's great.
Wholeheartedly, spiritual transformation is across the full board. This is not transformation.
Yeah.
Churches, although some churches do need spiritual transformation themselves as well, don't they? And that's worth reflecting on. But yeah, totally. And I kind of think one of the most strategic things about church unity for me is that people are scattered out all across our towns and cities in really strategic places. I mean, if you're to launch a movement to reach your town and city, you'd place people in healthcare and businesses and in service jobs and local government. You'd place them in all of these places, and you'd say, right, go and seek the spiritual transformation, the social transformation of those areas. And that's what Jesus has done. We are already placed in incredibly strategic positions. And so to see the body of Christ go, oh yeah, now I've got a spiritual responsibility in that place, but also a spiritual authority. I think we start to kind of tap into some wisdom that God's given to us by the very placement of his people.
You've been really pressing into this, not just as a church, but as a unity movement. Just tell us maybe just in a minute the sort of story of your unity movement, and then let's get into how this vision of spiritual transformation is connecting with your unity work.
So probably for about 10 years now, we've been a group of us have been working particularly hard at growing unity here in Teesside and developing good relationships and practices and habits of gathering and strategizing amongst Jesus' church. So we have a pretty effective network now of about 60 or 70 churches across Teesside. And we have rhythms of gathering and weekly prayer stuff we do, and lots of larger worship gatherings and leaders lunches and all of that sort of stuff. And it's led us on a bit of a journey, really, and I think it's beginning to see some real fruit in the kind of bigger mission that we're doing. And I think one of the things that we've discovered as we've done the hard yards of unity for the past 10 years, I think we discovered that unity really does command a blessing. And this is a spiritual reality that not just like it's not just a nice quote to post on Instagram. This is a spiritual reality, is that unity does actually command a blessing. And there's something we've discovered in just doing the many years of hard yards of unity, relationship building, serving our city. Sometimes when it's not been very fruitful, it has now actually led to a different reality that we're operating in now here in Teesside, and massively excited about the sort of season we're in. But it seems to come about through the pandemic, actually, as something's really shifted in Teesside. And I know this isn't the story everywhere, actually, because different towns and cities are kind of reporting sort of different spiritual and emotional reactions to the pandemic. But it's led to a real openness in the gospel. Lots of churches, I was just praying with a bunch of leaders this morning, people talking about a sense of open heaven, a sense of thinness between heaven and earth at the moment. Churches are reporting people just walking in off the streets when they've never done before. Every time I log onto Facebook, there's new baptisms in different churches happening. Alpha courses are becoming filled where before they were struggling to get 2 or 3 to come. And I've always said Teesside was hard ground spiritually. Actually, it was always every salvation you got was hard won, and it took a lot of hard work. And something shifted. And now I could be claiming this for unity, but I personally feel, as I've reflected on this prayerfully, that this is God saying to us, yeah, I'm blessing your unity, is because of the hard yards of unity you've been doing. I'm doing something. I'm moving. There's a sense of unity having a real spiritual impact, and I think that's within that spiritual battle that we're in as well. Is there's an authority that you can carry against the enemy when you're in unity with each other. This 2 or 3 gathered together in this, agreement in prayer, this agreement in mission, this display of the oneness of God through the oneness of the church. It seems to be starting to carry some authority now. It's I guess it's too early to tell how long this will last. But the church at the moment is not on the back foot here in Teesside, and a few years ago it was. And now this isn't totally across the board at all. This is not in every single church, but it's in enough churches for me to know it's not just in your classic charismatic evangelical churches that maybe would grow anyway. There are churches all over who are reporting just an openness to Jesus that we've not seen before. And in my own personal ministry, where before, salvations were hard won, we're seeing dozens of baptisms every year at the moment.
That is amazing. That is so exciting. So let's get into how you're doing this on the ground. I mean, if we start with prayer and worship, we'd love to know how you do City Unity for prayer and worship. What are your experiences and maybe sort of insights there?
Yeah, that's it. Well, I was thinking some of the different areas that I guess we can do spiritual transformation together as churches, not just as individual churches, but together as Town City. Yeah, I was thinking prayer and worship, discipleship, and evangelism are sort of 3 areas I'd want to cover. Prayer and worship, I guess, is the easiest one to kind of look at and start talking about. Most cities who are involved with our network here are involved in some sort of worship gathering, some sort of kind of citywide prayer strategy. But I guess we've found them really, really powerful times. We have a rhythm of weekly prayer for our church leaders, and that's been going on for 10 years now. And my conviction really is from that is that prayer is powerful. Like, it's totally powerful. Like, the things that we pray are powerful. It's not just a nice thing to gather together as leaders to pray, but there's something about the unity of Jesus's leaders gathering together in a city to pray over it, not just pray for yourselves, but pray for each other, that is actually leading to answers to prayer and a sense of power operating in our city, really. We then have larger gatherings about 3 times a year, where we try and gather the wider church. We've got one coming up this Sunday, actually, and we just grab whatever our largest venue is, and we go into that venue, and we often get between 500 to 800 people from about 80 different churches represented.
It's amazing. Is that from across? Because I mean, we want to be clear about Teesside is a number of local authorities, isn't it? So, are you talking about that kind of county-wide size, or more local, that you're drawing people together for prayer and worship?
Yeah, as with anywhere, geography is really messy and hard work with Unity. So yeah, we cross 3 local authorities with this sort of area that we've focused on. There's 2 terms. There's Tees Valley and then there's Teesside. Tees Valley is much bigger. Teesside is of a cluster of Middlesbrough, Stockton, Billingham, and Redcar and East Cleveland, which are a few towns kind of squashed together. So we've kind of looked at a map, bird's eye view, and said, yeah, that's a mission field, basically. Is if you're based in that mission field and you've been sent there by Jesus, then actually you're my brother, you're my sister, we're on the same mission, we've got the same job to do, so let's work together. Whereas some of the towns like Hartlepool and Darlington, still part of the wider sort of Tees Valley area, but actually probably separate mission fields. And so that's the area that we do that across. So it's not just Middlesbrough. It's and the bulk of our network is Middlesbrough and Stockton that we gather together in.
Yeah. And I mean, in terms of ecumenism, I mean, do you get sort of lots of traditions coming together, and how does that work? Because prayer can be a difficult thing for people from different traditions to actually, do that alongside each other.
Yeah, it can be. I think there's no fast forwarding with this. With prayer with other traditions, I think it's actually about getting to know each other and trusting each other. So it's trying to kind of give up the fact that I like prayer to be done in a certain way. Sorry. And trying to actually develop those relationships where actually, no, it doesn't matter how you're going to pray, because I know you as a person, I trust you as a person. And so particularly as church leaders, that took a while to develop. There was a lot of awkwardness in our prayer meetings at first, but after years, it's a great free environment to come into. There's many who sit very quietly in a more liturgical posture, and then there's some wonderful different nationalities who come and bring some loud prayers to those gatherings as well. So there's lots of variety. Being open about it, talking about it. If there's differences, then yeah, just being gentle with it, really. But I don't want to give the idea that we've been massively successful. We are mainly still gathering the more evangelical charismatic side of the church. That's where the impetus for gathering usually comes from. But we've got some great liturgical traditions that are still a part of that unity. But we're also working on it at the moment as well. So we're actually planning our one in January that we're planning. We're looking at actually doing a unity gathering, a worship gathering, but in a liturgical style. And I'm going to be working with the Catholic bishop on that and trying to invite all of the liturgical traditions that haven't really bought into unity quite so much. And we're going to try and do a bit better at it. So it takes time. So it's a ever-growing thing. And obviously different churches come in and come out depending on who their leader is. So it's never perfect. But yeah, I've discovered that through this, prayer is powerful. And as we pray for our area, we'll begin to see answers. And I also think worship's powerful as well. There's worship is it's not just a between you and God thing. There's a sense of you entering into spiritual warfare as we worship over cities. And I remember one of my most powerful times in worship was actually, I think it was in Harrogate, and a worship leader just really encouraged us to visualize us worshiping, not in a room between you and God, but worshiping over the city. And it was a real sort of, transformational moment for my thinking, actually. And I think there's when we are gathered together in worship, and when worship is happening across churches on a Sunday morning in all sorts of different locations, there's a power to that we're singing truth and declaring truth over our city. I think it's great to kind of shift our thinking with worship. It's not just me and God, but actually there's a powerful sort of warfare dynamic to it as well.
David's popped a message in a question in the chat saying, "What do you call the church gatherings?"
Yeah, do you know what? We actually call them Teesside churches together for that. Our network is called
Yeah,
Teesside together, but we called them Teesside churches together just to really make them feel a bit safe, because people kind of feel safe with that phrase, don't they? And we wanted all sorts of churches to feel like they were welcome and invited. So there was no
yeah.
massive reasoning to it, apart from it felt like it was something instantly recognizable that people could join in with then.
Brilliant. So take us on to your vision, or how you're doing city unity and discipleship then, and evangelism.
Yeah, now discipleship, I actually think this is the trickiest area for unity groups to engage in, because discipleship is one of those things that I think we like to keep in-house quite a lot, actually. For you to do discipleship with other churches means you've got to agree on a whole load of different things. To do prayer and worship together, there's some things you've got to agree on, but actually we're quite good at finding common ground. Evangelism, I think we've got some some easier practical things to do together. Discipleship, where there is a lot of different emphases, and different churches do things, but so I don't think we can suddenly be like, oh, let's do all discipleship across our city together. That's discipleship is happening in and out of churches all the time. Let's really affirm them. But I guess what I want to suggest is that we have a certain group of people who have eyes to have a look out over the church of their city. Like, where are we? What's the spiritual temperature of our city? What's the spiritual temperature of our church? How are we doing? Where do we need to grow in? Where are we weak? And these are the sort of conversations that we've had as church leaders over the past 10 years. And then to have a network that's able to kind of really respond to some of those holes. And so we've used some of our large prayer and worship gatherings actually to quite intentionally to disciple people in city thinking. So as we've gone to gather movement summits and things like that, we've then created sort of little mini movement day and gather movement summits in our city at those worship gatherings, and we've tried to kind of share that thinking that you are all on a mission, that sort of scattered disciple sort of stuff, and try and enlarge people's expectations of their own responsibility for mission in our town and city, really. So we're trying to spot, hey, where's some of those weaknesses? How can we address some of that when we are all gathered together? But then I think the other role comes in is churches encouraging each other in discipleship. And so the reality is at any given time, we've got a whole load of very weak churches who are really struggling in mission, struggling in discipleship, struggling just with passion and with age and with finances. And I think we need to have ways of the unified church in a town or city really kind of spotting that and not just sort of dismissing it, but coming alongside those churches and saying, hey, we're part of the same body. We need the whole body to be healthy. How do we work with you? And we've got some great examples at the moment of that happening. My own church, we're talking about sort of replanting alongside a more elderly Baptist congregation in Middlesbrough at the moment, and that's becoming quite exciting. There's another church in Redcar that's having another conversation with the church in Middlesbrough at the moment about this sort of kind of journeying together a bit more. We've just had some buildings been given away and swapped as well. There's a great growing church called Jubilee Church, and they've just swapped buildings with a dying Methodist congregation. And there's just this sort of, hey, are we able to sort of come alongside each other and spot where those gaps are, those weaknesses are, and kind of encourage each other forward. We're here to kind of build each other up, and each church has different sort of gifts. And so I think for the discipleship, it's sort of this big picture. Who's the group that's kind of spotting this stuff? I think a lot of this is about the same wisdom that you take to apply to your own church if you're a church leader. That same thinking and wisdom that we've learned over the years, how do we then apply that to an entire town or city? Because if we are one church, then let's apply some of that wisdom to it. And so that's been really exciting to see, and I think we're flourishing in developments there. And it's also just been great to see where there has been dying churches and there's been prayer and encouragement that's come alongside. We've now seen a number of examples where that's changed and shifted, and now they're growing churches, they're on mission. Maybe we've seen areas where there's been dark spiritual points in our city, and then we've been praying for church planters, and now we've seen church planters come in and released into those parts of our city. So there's a sort of oversight area there for the unity movement, is having that bigger picture, not just what's happening in my church, but what's happening in the church.
Yeah. So let me just take a step back there, because when we think about discipleship, we think about people coming to faith, exploring faith, and then growing in faith. And there's been some of the Willow Creek resources that talked about growing in Christ, becoming close to Christ, and then being really Christ-centered. And there is a journey, isn't there? And sometimes we oscillate as Christians on our own journey. But in terms of discipleship as a unity movement, actually, you're thinking not so much just about individuals, but you're thinking about actually how do we support churches with the depending on the resources that they've got for all of that activity in their churches. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think so. The discipleship capability of the church, and to have eyes for that. But not that the individual isn't important, but I guess we, as a unity movement, we're not going to be quite as effective. That's really the local church's role, isn't it? I think it's always important to reflect at what level are different things done best. But and like I say, there have been particular issues that we've picked up as a unity movement to try and push us forward. And for a long time, that sense of being scattered and placed people, having a heart for our location and being on mission, we really emphasised that. And I think we did see that as a discipleship issue that moved forward. And right now, we'll talk about in a moment, but with the issue of evangelism and sort of boldness in proclaiming the gospel, we've spotted that as an issue, and we're really pushing into that as a discipleship thing across the churches. How do we grow in that, do better in that? So there are some things I think you can take on.
Okay, so I mean, one thing that we've been thinking a lot about, I'm based in Bolton, and we have 100 churches across Bolton local authority, is, maybe how do we work to grow leaders together? And, could we run a one-year discipleship training course for young adult leaders? And rather than one church do their thing, actually, could we do that together? So, I think this discipleship thing does tie into how, as a unity movement, can we grow leaders more effectively together? Have you got any thoughts on that, Steve?
Yes, definitely. But don't step into stuff like that naively thinking everyone's going to buy into it. I think it's wonderful when we get it. And we in fact, we have Cranmer Hall Theological College is not too far from us up in Durham. And actually, they have a heart for doing training in local areas. And so they're doing some leadership development stuff at the moment that we helped them kind of launch across the churches. And so those sorts of things are great. And they get some buy-in, but they'll never feel like the whole church gathered, I don't think. But they're still important and great to do. But yeah, just managing expectations. I think sometimes when you do the big worship gatherings and we've got everyone gathered together and we think, oh, we can do everything together. Actually, discipleship is one of those things that is being done. It's also being done quite effectively in a lot of local churches and one-on-one in small groups and through the sort of faithful preaching of preachers as well. So some good ways, we've got some good discipleship structures in place already. But for particular issues, and also if there's particular gifts within the city, so we do have a guy in one of our larger churches who leads a theological training school, and he's got great background, very well thought of guy, and actually their church opened that up to the wider church, and they have a lot of buy-in from different churches going to that as well. So it's definitely something we can do, but I think it needs to be probably lots of little things rather than one big thing is probably going to be the reality.
That's really wise. Thank you. Tell us a bit and then about this work that you're doing, exciting work in terms of city unity and evangelism.
Yeah, definitely. So, around a year and a half ago, we were as churches spotting that we were in a different season than we were in pre-pandemic, and we were we were just spotting people wanted to know about Jesus, and it was amazing. And these baptisms were starting to happen, and everyone was starting to talk about it. So we said, hey, what is happening? Do we need to strategize a little bit over this, and do we need to start praying into this season that we're in as churches across Teesside? And then at the very same time, we were approached by the Lewis Palau Association, who are a large sort of evangelistic association. They have a great base here in the UK. Some amazing guys, and they had just sort of finished doing Festival Manchester, which was the biggest evangelistic festival the UK's seen in 30 years. And they worked with the Message Trust in Manchester to make that happen last year. And I think they were looking for a smaller sort of mission to do, but they wanted to work with places that had established church unity. So they had a chat with us, and their approach to us came just at this sort of God-given timing as we're kind of seeking together, hey, God, what are you doing in evangelism across our city? And so we've started planning together for June next year, the 8th and 9th of June, 2024. We're doing something called Festival Teesside, and we're having a good month worth of social action and different mission events and evangelism events that are going to be happening across all sorts of different churches, and then all culminating in a 2-day music and sports and family festival in our biggest park in the middle of Middlesbrough. And it's really exciting, a bit daunting, big budgets to raise, lots of churches to organise, lots of different teams that are being developed and things. But this is certainly accelerating us in a way that by doing something so, I guess, demanding and larger scale together, it's forced us in a much shorter amount of time to get more organized with things. So we've now developed pretty good teams now to look at prayer strategy over the whole of the towns, and different prayer strategy in different parts of the towns as well in preparation for the festival. We've started working together on alpha courses as well. So right now there's 19 alpha courses that have just started a couple of weeks ago here in Teesside. And we did a launch event where we had training from the Alpha UK came up and did some training with us, and we must have had 30 churches who came to the Alpha training with their team. Wow. And now we're, like I say, we've got 19 Alpha courses. It's all been launched at the same time, and we're doing a joint Alpha away day all together. So each church is running their own course, but we're doing the joint Alpha away day together, which will gather us and get to eat together. And one of our larger churches is hosting us for that and cooking for us for that. Wow. So that's really exciting. And I guess there's just a real growing expectation as we sort of cast the vision, and we're doing lots of prayer stuff and fundraising and mission preparation for the festival. There's a sense of expectation, anticipation that actually, that now is the time to reap some harvest. I feel like we've been ploughing the fields for a long time and planting the seeds, and I think there's some time for harvest that we're entering into here. And again, I don't know whether I'm 100% right, but I spiritually have a sense that this is a season that's come about here in Teesside because of the unity that we've worked hard for, and that unity commands a blessing. So evangelism is something that we're really growing in, and as we have more and more testimonies as well, we're growing in our boldness, growing in our sense of confidence in the proclamation of the gospel and not just the loving display of the gospel. So it's been an exciting season to be in, and I'll hopefully have some good reports to you at the end of June next year.
Yeah. So interesting you're doing the alpha courses now. I guess the idea is that you're building a habit of doing them, together like this again next year.
That's exactly right. A dry run, a practice run. I think the scale of it, we'd love to have 50 alpha courses running in September next year. So there's a really clear follow-up procedure for anyone who responds. And so we thought, well, to go from 0 to 50 is probably too big a deal. So we thought, let's do a practice run this year, learn some lessons, and make some mistakes this year, and then see what happens, and see if we can then encourage and do some more training over the next year in preparation for next September. So it's exciting. I think Sheffield, I just spoke to a guy in Sheffield as well yesterday, and they're starting to plan the same idea of doing a citywide alpha strategy.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, to have 19 courses in your region all happening, I mean, they start in pretty much the same week and they're all,
That's what we said. If they could, we gave them a starting date, and we chose
yeah,
the in September because the university students were back in town as well.
yeah,
And we all launched on the same week, but everyone doing it whatever night of the week works for them, just as they normally would do. And we penciled in the date for the joint away day.
yeah.
Really simple. We were going to look at doing joint advertising across the city until the Alpha people told us that 98.5% or something of people who come on Alpha come because of a personal invite and not because of advertising.
Mm-hmm.
So we kind of thought, let's save our money, and we'll do
Okay.
the. We spent a bit of time doing training for churches, well, for the Alpha course leaders, to make sure that they're talking about a culture of inviting people along. And it's great so far. I've not got the official figures of how many people have started, but anecdotally, the Alpha courses that are being done this time are larger than those churches would normally expect. So there seems to be a sense of blessing again that we're doing it in unity.
Mm-hmm. We did try praying in Bolton, and everybody put their banners up at the same time, and the booklets outside in these little plastic boxes. So it can be a real impact across a town of just raising awareness that these initiatives do exist. And yeah, so that's exciting, just sort of seeing the church working together in a coordinated way. And yeah, I mean, it'd be great to hear how the away day goes, just seeing everybody brought together. Because I understand the groups will still be in their church groups. It's just that they're in a venue being shared with everybody else. And I would think that would be really an amazing sight, really, to see such a large sense of church gathered and everybody exploring and learning together.
Yeah, exactly. And that does keep it quite simple, actually. So you're not suddenly mixing all the groups up and tell them to get to know new people. The room will be set up in sort of cafe style circular areas where you go with your regular group. You're still led in the discussion by your Alpha group leader. But together we do some worship, together we do some prayer, and have some testimonies and things. So and it's great for these people who are maybe first time in churches and they've been coming to a small group of 7 or 8 people on an Alpha, but then they get a sense of the wider church and what they're a part of. So I think it'll be, hoping. We've done it before with 3 or 4 churches, but never with 19 churches. So we're excited.
Brilliant, brilliant. I want to open it up to the whole group to ask you questions, Steve. I've got one in the chat, so put your hand up physically or virtually so we can get you to ask Steve a question about anything he shared. Sean put a question in the chat saying, how do you get started? In my area, there's not much happening between churches, and I'd love to see it start. It'd be a bit overwhelming to hear how much is going on in Teesside and Tees Valley, but how do we get started, Steve?
Yeah, it's a slow burner, Sean. It definitely didn't happen overnight. And we always say in these sorts of gather movement settings, it's all to do with relationship and trust. Interestingly, different movements do have different beginnings. For us, it was praying together. We started with about 6 church leaders in Middlesbrough who really felt a conviction to start praying together. And we just thought, right, let's do it. Whether no one else shows up, we'll keep on doing it. And slowly we invited more people and it grew. And we learned to trust each other. And then the reputation of it grew. And it just slowly happened like that. For others, I have seen as well that they start from actually something organized. So they work together on a food bank or a project or a joint mission, and actually from that relationships grow. But it's that's the key thing, is that we learn to trust each other, because trust is that invisible thing that actually stops you from throwing yourself in to a joint church mission or actually going in. And you just know it yourself. You got an email from someone you barely know and you're not quite sure and you don't know whether you trust. You're not really reading that email fully, are you? Whereas you get an email from someone you know, you trust, you love, you've been praying with maybe for the last couple of years. Suddenly you take notice and you're like, yeah, right, I want to do that with them. And so it is a slow burner, but it's Sean, I just say start asking people for tea, coffee, say, hey, can I come and get to know you? And ask them how they're doing personally, how you're doing, how's your church doing, how can I pray for you, and it grows from there, really. And also, let's not just try and copy each other as well. It's not what God's doing in Teesside might not be the right season for what He's doing in another part of the country. We can definitely learn lessons from each other, but let's seek God for our places. What's the Holy Spirit leading us into? And as you grow a sense of, we're not just a church, but we're part of the church of our area. You can start seeking God for what's He saying to us collectively.
Thanks, Steve. Dave, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. It was inspiring, and it makes you slightly jealous, doesn't it? Hearing all that stuff. But yeah.
We're way behind you guys, Dave, on a whole load of the social action stuff. We're just we're just in a good season for the spiritual stuff at the moment.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Steve, just a quick question, and apologies if my Zoom goes off. I'm on the Wi-Fi here, so we'll see how it goes. But can I just clarify, the unity movement in Teesside that seemed to start in Middlesbrough will have been shaped by you, and you're a church leader. Would it be the case that in other cities there may be other people who shape those movements, and sometimes the movement is kind of it's shaped by them because they're taking part, and it's not always a church leader? And do you have anyone in Teesside who's alongside you who's got a kind of massive passion for mission and is out there? So just to give you an example, Bristol and Leeds, it seems to, I don't always hear too much about the church leaders, but the church leaders are involved. But like Teesside, you just said it, and I'm sure if you went to Bradford, for example, and I'm sure there's many other cities, the church leaders are very much taking the lead on stuff. So do you have someone else who's a passionate missioner working alongside you? And is that something that we should strive for in our cities, to have both? We've got church leaders alongside missioners, and they're both at the centre. It seems very difficult to do, to get both those entities. So I don't know if that makes any sense to you, but I don't know if you can try and answer that.
I've probably got 1,000 thoughts on that, Dave. That's a lot of stuff. If I can definitely see a role to have it, to having a sort of two-part leadership role, one that takes more of a key role in maybe the social action and coordinating that across the city, and then one that maybe has more responsibility for church leadership and unity of the churches. I can definitely see that, and that's particularly desirable, I think, where you've got some very organized social action projects across the city, because the key thing is we need them to not get detached from the local church. That's what we've seen in the past, isn't it? As we've seen some first generation of Christian social action is amazing. The church are doing this. Then suddenly it gets bigger and they have to professionalize, and they employ a non-Christian as a CEO, and then they employ more non-Christians, and slowly it gets detached from the local church. And so to keep those together is really key and important. For me, I view Teesside more as I view our role as the unity movement, rather than running an organized thing, is more trying to shape a culture of partnership and unity as the norm. That's what I see as my role. And that means that we work with all sorts of different people, and a part of, just as important part of our network as church leaders is the Christian charity leaders. And also there's just some people that just have spiritual authority, that when I've been here now for 14 odd years, and you just get a sense that sometimes church leaders come and go. In fact, often they come and go. And there's other people that are the Jesus appointed people, who may not have clergy positions, but they definitely have leadership roles within the church. And they're the ones that I now invest in more than certain church leaders. I think over the years, I was much more church leader focused a few years ago. I think the pandemic changed that, actually, again, because we had 25% of our church leaders in Teesside left over the pandemic or retired over the pandemic. So we kind of came out of lockdown and we were like, where are all these people that we were doing kind of partnership with? And that's just inevitable with the way different denominations do church leadership. I guess not everyone's involved in long-term stuff. And so I've tried to have more of an eye open for, well, who are the ones who are really committed to the place, the location, the geography, and says, this is where God's placed me. And actually, we're trying to give them more and more prominence, and they're the ones that are starting to develop our sort of prayer networks. And a lot of the key teams that we're doing for Festival Teesside are not necessarily run by church leaders, but by key leaders that we know have a heart for Jesus and for the city. Is that answer? Probably we should have a private conversation on that one, Dave, because we could talk for a couple hours.
Yeah, no, thanks for that, Steve. That's good.
Yeah. Nick, you've got your hand up. You need to unmute.
Thanks, that's helpful. I have builders renovating my kitchen at the moment, so I thought I wouldn't bless you with that background noise. Yeah, thanks for that. Are you Stephen or Steve? Sorry. Okay. Yeah, so this is going to be maybe a bit raw. I'm just kind of processing it all. So my role at the moment is in a voluntary sector organisation and working at doing some ground level work with people in recovery, whether that's addiction or mental health. And you know, it's been but my background is also church leadership, so I'm constantly like wrestling that out and what like the kingdom coming looks like in those ground level environments. And it's just been such a fascinating journey to see how Holy Spirit has worked in those situations. For example, I was running a joy course this morning for people in recovery, like getting people to speak biblical truths over themselves. It's just they don't realize it's the Bible, like Jehovah sneaky. And then like having conversations with my line manager where she says her feedback to me is like, oh, my conversations with you always give me life. And then actually starting to connect with some Christians who are in this line of work and haven't got another opportunity. So I'm seeing all those, like that's the heaven coming to earth, it's the kingdom coming. I'm seeing that spiritual authority in my work, and I hear all that stuff that you're talking about, and that's all great, and I've been a part of that in a kind of past life. But I guess and obviously you just touched on this in your response to David, but when it's not a specific social action project, when it's just me as like the individual in my work, I'm guessing, what are your thoughts on how we bring those sides together? Does that make sense?
Totally. I loads of thoughts on it. What I've probably not got is loads of experience of doing it really well, because it's a bit of a gap up here. But again, if you've been a part of Gather Movement Conversations, they talk about the spheres of life and how do we release disciples into those spheres and really owning their role as disciples in those areas. And I think it's so key because say, I don't know how many NHS workers are Christians in your area. So many of them obviously going to work day in, day out, working really hard. They are connecting their faith with their work, and to a certain degree, aren't they? Because they're serving people, they're loving people.
Absolutely.
And they could get paid if they were doing it in the private sector. So they're connecting the faith. But I think we've got to reflect on how do we take that to the next level, where actually they take hold of the fact that they are Jesus's sent people, and they are actually the leaders of the church in the NHS. I'm using the NHS as an example. And how does it change when you're not just hearing that from a sermon, but you're actually gathering Christians who are NHS workers together and saying, hey, the state of the NHS right now is you guys are key responsibility holders, spiritual authority holders over that sphere of your city. Get praying for it. Get walking in prayer over it. Get praying together over it. Get talking together and strategizing over it. I can just imagine, gathering all the teachers in our city for a prayer meeting over the education sector of Teesside, sharing the problems, really dreaming up what does God want to see happen here. And then I can just see that reframing a teacher's day job, because I'm going to go in differently the day after that, because I've started thinking about the bigger picture. So I think sometimes as unity workers, we're used to thinking of the big picture a lot, and that actually really helps us. And I think we need to introduce some of the big picture into different people's workplaces. And I think we do that by gathering the spheres and the sectors. And there are some cities and towns through the Gather movement that you'll get in touch with who are doing that really well and effectively. We're just not started on that here in Teesside. But Reading's always the example of where they're doing that much more effective than anywhere else, really.
Thanks, Steve. That's really helpful. We're David, a quick question. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. That's been really good. Just a comment for Sean. The stuff in York started 25 years ago, and a couple of things are really important. One was meeting every week, because we started meeting monthly, and then if you miss a month, it's 2 months, and then starting with just 2 or 3 people who are committed to meeting every week. And then the other thing is just learning how to listen to God rather than everyone doing their best prayers. Just stop. Everyone's a leader. They can all pray. What's God saying? And just learning about that. So that was really helpful. I'd be really interested, Steve, what actually happens in your Churches Together meeting? What do you actually do? Because we've run some meetings and we're not getting it quite right because people aren't coming.
Well, there's 3 different levels. There's the weekly prayer one, which we are really strict on it just being prayer. So instead of talking for half an hour and then praying at the end, we're 5 minutes, get your coffee, and then we're straight into prayer. We do a lot of laying hands on each other because I became highly aware that church leaders don't often, well, in certain denominations, don't often get hands laid on them and prayed for. So we do a lot of that. Our leaders' lunch, which is bi-monthly, and we tend to get about 80 church leaders and their teams at the leaders' lunches. We don't bring in guest speakers unless there's a real strategic reason for it. And kind of discovered it across most sort of Churches Together movements. They may bring in a guest speaker, so-and-so is coming to talk about this, come and hear about this. I can access the best Bible teaching, discipleship teaching from my phone at any time of the day I like. I don't need that from a unity group. Actually, what I need from a unity group is to talk about local things, talk about get to know and pray for my local area and strategize. We need to make it effective. So what are the questions that are really effective for our local ministry that affect our churches, not just the church in the UK, but our churches in our area? What are the questions we're asking? What are things we're wrestling with? And we every now and again have a guest speaker if it's a particular topic that is really relevant strategically to us. But sometimes we have a bit of worship together. We then get some prayer going off it around different tables. And then we will take a different issue or a topic that we feel needs to be discussed and worked through. So obviously in the preparation for Festival Teesside, we were talking a lot about that and trying to bring strategy from the wider church into it. But other times we've talked about the spheres. We've talked about whole life discipleship. We've talked about churches that are struggling, churches that are doing well. How do we do unity better? And we've tried to say, hey, well, actually, what's strategic for the way that we want to grow as a city and a church as the city? Again, think of it in the same way you'd lead your own church team. I think is what's an effective team meeting. I try and view it as a team meeting rather than an event. Team meeting. What does our team need to be updated on? What do we need to speak about? What do we need to pray about?
Yeah, the big meeting I want to know about.
Sorry, I've waffled on it. It's the big meeting. The big meeting, obviously, praise and worship. We have a word given, but it's always a 15-minute word. And then we have a panel discussion every time. Now, that panel is different depending on what we want to emphasize. One time we were emphasizing the spheres that I was talking to Nick just then about. And we had a panel of people who worked in different areas, and we really asked them to talk about, hey, how's Jesus working in that area? What are you seeing? And we were really trying to empower people. But we've taken different topics like that, but we use the panel discussion to do that really well, and it's been really effective. And then we have different leaders come up and lead us in prayer on that topic. And then we worship again. So it's been a pretty regular schedule for about the past few years, actually, that we do. But we take a different topic each time. But again, I think we're thinking prophetically and strategically, what is the topic that we want to grow in? at the moment? What's the issue that God's laying on our heart as a city, as a church of that city?
And how often was that, Stephen? Sorry.
3 times a year for the big one.
That's really helpful, Steve. Thank you. Some really clear thinking there. So thank you very much, everybody. It's been great just to share this discussion together.